think is really important to talk about is the preservation of our story as well. A lot of folks don't know, but my father was 96 when he passed away. My birth father, the father that raised me, if he was still alive today, he'd be about 104. And I start with that because so much of my story really stems from understanding just what my parents had to sacrifice for me to stand in front of you. And I think that's where I join in on the reparations conversation. That's where I join in on the reality that as I'm 28, I'm able to be a city council member of a very prominent East Side community, and a community with a lot of different families, cultural backgrounds, all of the things that you would say, hey, there's so many really cool people in our community. How are they communicating with each other? And then I remind folks, I grew up in a very small town, like about 10,000 people. My graduating high school class was about 165 students. And I bring them back to my mom and my dad's story, and just to kind of share with you, just so you know where I'm coming from today and the lens that I'm bringing. My father grew up in Kansas City, Kansas. My mother grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. My mom was born 3 days after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. And my father worked at in the pork plant for 33 years. So kind of growing up, we were the Social Security, Medicare family, and I didn't really understand that growing up, or just like the fixed income space. You kind of learn that after the fact, but quite literally because my father was able to be in a position that allowed him to make just enough, but still underpaid because he was a Black man maneuvering life in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Is really important to the story that I have now of being able to take advantage of these spaces to hopefully foster change. So when I hear a lot of the conferences and I try to get caught up on just some of the discussions, some of the powerful presentations you've heard through the duration of this conference, I hear a lot of passion behind issues, but I also hear a lot of story that's left unsaid, that's left untold, and I'm reminded of how important that is, because it's often the Black story, the Black narrative that gets lost because it's intentionally lost. The story of that preservation, the grit that so many of our Black ancestors have carried, individuals that have really had to see life in so many different ways. When I would go home and talk to my dad about what I had encountered, he was like, well, at least you can go in through the front door of the grocery store. Because I remember when I had to go to the back entrance. When I would talk to him about how I had to ride the school bus, he said, you have no idea how important it is to ride that darn school bus because of people who had to basically give their lives for you to be able to do so. When I've had to really acknowledge the fact that my family is expecting me to do as much as I can for our community, as much as I can for my family, because in many ways, shape, or form, the generational curses break with me. And how our journeys differ so much, because I still have family in Memphis, Tennessee. I still have family in Kansas. I still have family in Atlanta. And a lot of them have a very different story than being a city council member, a metropolitan area, a city, a municipality, because they also don't have a college degree and they did not get the opportunity because their parents, my family, my aunts, my uncles stayed in their area. And so when you think about just the opportunities and things that we're given, you recognize that reparations is a large part of a conversation based off opportunity, based off who's able to take back the things that were taken from them. And in some places, things that were intentionally erased, stories that were basically denied, and then you have a younger generation, people who are at my age or younger, trying to understand just how they got there. And if you don't have someone in your family like we have that can tell you, that can remind you, people that can present to you, can have different state legislative policies that can advocate and change the trajectory of a generation, then you don't even know the story of your people and the story of your community. And so that's why I'm very passionate about the work that you all are doing. Very grateful to be able to head the city council in a way that now we have 2 Black African-American women on the council, and while I'm very excited about that, I'm also sitting with that space, that feeling of understanding that we've only had 3 ever, right? I'm sitting with the reality that while I'm really excited to be in Minnesota, that we only have 3 Black senators ever. I'm sitting with the reality that we have only ever had 2 Black women on the Ramsey County Board ever. I'm sitting with the fact that we've never had a Black mayor. I'm sitting with a governor. We've never had we have women that are running for office that are really trying to make a difference, but I'm sitting with the fact that we've only ever had 1 Black man ever hold a statewide office in our state. But Black people have been in this state for centuries. So there's a space where I really, look at how far we've come as a nation, but I think about how far we have to go. And that's why reparations is so important, because in order to know how far we have to go, you have to understand how far we were pushed back. So that's part of my narrative and kind of why I've chosen to get into all the public service, because so much of the Black story has been intentionally designed to be to be basically pushed back by laws and policies that were put in place when we were here. They were done and designed in a way to make sure that we wouldn't get what we were entitled to, that we wouldn't get to the spaces that we could be influential. Like, that is a part of our narrative, that is a part of our story, especially for Africans. I saw a space that's asked, what gives you hope? And they asked for comments. And one of the things that I think gives me hope is that there's still stories being told. There are still people who understand the impact that can happen when you tell a young person, you can do because I have already done, and I have sacrificed so much for you to be able to do what you set your mind to. And regardless of the setbacks, regardless of the things, the systems, things that are in place, if it wasn't for my dad and mom reminding me of all they had to deal with at my age, I wouldn't think that I could run for a city council seat. I wouldn't think that I could go to college at the University of Minnesota, because quite literally my college, my high school counselor told me that I shouldn't apply. I had a 3.8 GPA. I was the vice president of my high school class. I mentioned earlier that they had 165 students. I was 10 out of 165, and yet my counselor told me I couldn't apply to the U, right? So when you're thinking about real-time systems in place, if you listen to people who constantly tell you you can't get somewhere, it takes your parents, it takes your family, it takes your community to remind you that you can. And so that's why I wanted to come today and just kind of help facilitate this questions and dialogue, because I want to remind people, and especially, this room, just how important our young community is, how important our youth are, and sharing the stories of your experiences, because in some ways, even if it's on TikTok, it might remind somebody just how far they can go because somebody's already tried that path. So thank you guys so much for letting me enter the space.